Welcome to Books, Universe, and Everything. My name is Ryan Boucher. I'm with Life, the Universe, and Everything, the symposium that on science fiction and fantasy that we do every year in February in Provo. Today, what we're doing, well, let me introduce what we're doing really quick here, is that all year, each month, we are going to be doing a book club online with some of the cool panelists and presenters that we have at LTUE. In this case, we've got three wonderful authors, and we're going to be talking about the awesome stuff that we have in that we find in The Hero and the Crown by Robin McKinley. We're going to spend the next hour with you, kind of talking about the book, talking about some things that authors see in it that maybe just you wouldn't notice. And if you are an aspiring author, maybe some things that you should take into account for yourself as well. So let's start with introducing our team today. Let's just go across the top, but then across the bottom. So Cassiopeia, you're first.
My name is Cassiopeia Fletcher. I go by Cassie, and I am a kind of across the board author. I started out writing soft sci-fi and hard fantasy, and I just kind of drifted in different directions where I found good stories that were worth telling. Uh, I think that you can tell where I am in my life based off of the stories that I'm telling, because when I was a teenager, I wrote for teenagers, and when I was a young adult or a new adult, I wrote for new adults. Now I'm an adult, and I write for children. So that's kind of how that goes.
That is how that goes. um, I'm Jessica Day George. I am the New York Times bestselling author of 16 books and counting. They're all fantasy. If there's not a dragon, I don't want to be involved in that story. Um, and they're all middle grade or young adult. And I started out writing for adults because I was told that that was what real writers did. You write serious books for adults. And so I tried writing for adults and kept being told that my characters actually sounded like teenagers and I needed to knock 10 years off everybody's age. So I finally did that. And yes, now that I'm an adult, I write for kids and it makes me so happy.
That's an interesting thing to find out. Yeah.
My natural voice is 15-year-old girl.
Okay. All right, and
Mine
Jeff,
apparently is seven-year-old.
7-year-old.
Yeah.
It's my niece. She's gotten to me. I can't help it.
Jeff, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Jeff Wheeler. I'm a Wall Street Journal bestselling author. I've got over 40 novels. Most of them are epic fantasy, but I broke away and did some thrillers for a series I did just recently. And getting into a totally different genre took a lot of learning and stuff. But fantasy is my first love. I quit my day job at Intel a little over 10 years ago and have been a full-time author ever since. And don't miss a single day of working in the tech industry, but sometimes I have nightmares about it. So
I still sometimes have nightmares that I'm clocking in late to McDonald's, and I haven't done that for like 20 years.
Yeah. Okay, we are here to talk about The Hero and the Crown today. This might be a book that if you are my age, which is pushing 50, you might have read this back in junior high school or high school, sometime around there. Uh, it came out in 1985 and is the sequel, 1984, and is the sequel to The Blue Sword. But it's not really a sequel, it's actually a prequel. So
Cool. Yeah.
it's one of the first books I ever read that I read in order of this one, and then I read The Blue Sword after that. And so I didn't know that it was a prequel sequel kind of thing. But then later I found out that The Blue Sword came out first, and that this is written as a prequel. We'll talk about that a little bit coming up. But so there you go. George Lucas was not the first one to put in prequels into things. It's been happening for a while. I wanted to give just a kind of a quick synopsis. We're going to go light spoilers today. We're trying not to spoil anything too big, but I do want people to know what the book is about. So In this case, we have a heroine, Erin, who is the daughter of King Arlbeth of Damar, and she has always been like an outsider. Her mother was a mysterious woman from the north who died shortly after Erin's birth, and there are rumors that still persist that she was a witch and bewitched the king into marrying her. She was the king's second wife after his first wife passed away, leaving him without any heirs. So, unlike her royal relatives, Erin shows no sign of the gift, which is the magical abilities that mark the nobility. Instead, she's awkward and quiet. She is often lost in her own thoughts, shunned by her people mostly, and overshadowed by her cousin Galana. And because of some political intrigue, her position in the royal bloodline's not even secure, and her cousin Tor stands as heir to the throne instead of her. But determined to prove her worth, Erin devotes herself to mastering combat skills and uncovering old knowledge, and she discovers a nearly forgotten recipe for kennet, a salve that makes the skin fireproof. And with this, she begins hunting the small dragons that are more like pests that plague the kingdom, and slowly begins to earn the admiration of her people, though most of the nobility still see her as little more than an oddity. Erin's courage is put to the ultimate test when the kingdom is threatened by Mar, an ancient dragon of monstrous size. Against her father's wishes, and armed only with her fireproof ointment, her father's spear, and sheer determination, Erin sets out alone to face the beast.
And her horse.
And her horse.
And her
of course.
horse.
Major character.
Her horse is. I was
Bigger
saving
character
that
than
for
her
characters. That is true. He spends there's a lot more time in the book for the horse than than
than either of them.
Yeah.
um
He has to be named because this is very important. I just literally was giving a school presentation earlier this morning, and I always talk about the fact that it's the rare case where the horse doesn't die. Like,
that's yeah. Okay, well
this horse, he's a retired war horse, so he's even older. And he
well,
does not die. That was groundbreaking for the time period.
Oh
That's
yes, like
true.
'cause, us 80s babies know that if you had a horse, it got Arcticsed.
it did. Yes, exactly right. All right, well let's jump into the characters. Obviously, now we have to start with Talit. Talit is Erin's horse. Talit used to be her father's horse before he was wounded in battle and became lame. But instead of putting him down, they put him out to pasture, and Erin helps him to recover as she is also recovering at the same time. And he does have a personality for sure in the book, which is kind of fun and is a really good part of the book. We have Erin, of course. We just talked about her a bunch. King Arlbeth is the king and loves his daughter, is kind of distant, but generally speaking has really good interactions with Erin. And so I liked that part about it. We have Tor, is the Sola, or male heir to the throne. He is Erin's only friend, and he loves her dearly. Galana is the foil for Erin in the court. She is Erin's cousin. She's beautiful. She's vindictive. She and her husband Perlith are constantly causing Erin grief about things. We have an immortal sorcerer named Luth, who comes in about halfway through the book, and he is there as the mentor character in this and teaches Erin a lot about her gift and her family. And we have Agsdead, who is an evil wizard as well. Yeah, those are really the big characters in. And Tika. Sorry, Tika's not on my list. Tika is another main character. She is the maid who is there for Erin all the time. She raised her and basically and is constantly doting on her and making sure that she's okay. She has some good advice for her sometimes, and is Erin is when Erin is trying to sneak around places, she's usually trying to do it without Tika noticing. But I did notice that Tika almost always does notice, which is nice. So
She was a very. I kept reading it, going, "Who does Tika remind me of? Who does she remind me of? Like, there's a character that she reminds me of." And then I just hit me. She's just that archetypical maid from like every story that has a young, adventurous female protagonist. The
yeah,
nurse from Romeo and Juliet, and like just she's just very archetypal. And I was like, "Oh,
Is
that's why she reminds me of
is
every maid."
but she's very pivotal because this court, Aaron has very few supporters. Her
right,
dad is a loving dad, but he's also the king of this country. There are a lot of issues that he has. He does not have an heir. It has to be a male heir. Tor is a dude, so he's there for her when he remembers, because he's a dude. Like, why? Someone was mean to you? What? No one's ever mean to me. Blah, blah, blah. There are rumors that she's illegitimate. There are rumors that she's not even her father's daughter. And Tika is always there for her and was placed to be her maid, like her nurse and then her maid by the king specifically because she had also loved her mother and had served Aaron's mother
Yep.
before she died. And so it's not only a sign that there are people who love and support Aaron and who loved her mother, but also that her dad is aware of how much her life sucks when he's not in the room.
right.
Like, could have just been like, oh, well, we need a nurse for this baby, and stuff. No, he specifically placed someone there who would be a protector and a supporter for her. So I've always
that triggers something else in my head is that there is another character that we're not acknowledging, and that's the narrator, because there is a kind of omniscient narrator. And the one thing that I really liked about the way that the author did this omniscient narrator is that the narrator was extremely self-aware of what story was being told. And so, for most of it, we're inside Erin's head, and we're getting her thoughts and her feelings and her emotions and her perceptions. But every now and then, the narrator's just like, by the way, here are these other people who are experiencing things, and it's very clear that Erin's worldview is very, very narrow, very self-focused. Not in a negative way, but it's very clear. She's a young teenage girl who has a lot of outside pressure, who has a lot of a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-confidence, and so we're getting that. But then we're also getting the narrator saying, by the way, she has a father who absolutely loves and adores her, and she has this guy who thinks she's just like the great star that fell from the sky, and then she's got this nurse who's basically a mom, and
Yeah,
and so and here are the people in the town who think that she's quirky, but she's a great person. So she's not as isolated as she thinks she is. But I think it's really telling for young girls who feel that way, so that they can recognize that Erin has those feelings, they can relate to those feelings, but they can also say, well, maybe if I get outside of myself a little bit, I can see that I'm not alone. I'm
right.
not as isolated. I'm not as unloved as I thought I was.
No, absolutely. Let's talk about some of the elements of the book. You brought up the narrator. In this book, the narrator is third person omniscient, which means that every now and then you do get to jump into somebody else's head, and you're not just stuck in Erin's head. That's maybe a little bit different than more current books that we have, where a lot of are in first person or a lot are third person, narrow view. What do you think about? What did you think about the writing and the storytelling with that narrator type? Did it work for you? What do you think? Let's go with Jeff. We'll start at the bottom and then work our way up.
Thanks. That was something that really stood out to me because we don't really see third person omniscient. Every time I've even attempted to do it earlier in my writing, my editors would be like, "You can't do that," and so they say no. But I thought it was great because it did offer those insights into how her dad felt, or maybe even the horse was given a little insight too. It's just
Sometimes.
it's neat. Yeah, it's neat how that narrator's kind of just filling in some of those gaps that we don't see today. It doesn't work today, and I just don't know people that do that today, but I thought it was helpful for what it was trying to do, and it gave you those little asides that you couldn't get any other way.
Jessica, did that help you to feel more like you understood the story, or that you understood Aaron as a character? What do you think?
It helped me. I don't know so much like say like, oh, it helped me understand, but to me it elevates the narrative. Because you could say there's a lot of stories, and a lot of stories kind of came after this one too, where it's like girl power, you know, this girl is the hero and stuff like that. There is such a style to it. The other book I always think of that has this type of narration is A Christmas Carol, which is one of my all-time favorite books, and Charles Dickens is telling you this story. This is what happened to Scrooge, and that's why you get the ending where Tiny Tim, who did not die, you know, he's going to tell you
Yeah.
what's going forward. He knows the whole story. It's happened. He's telling it to you, and you get that feel from this. And I just love that. It gave it such like a style, such an excellent voice to me. It's like, because yeah, if you were just in Aaron's head, you would think she can be kind of whiny and like, why does everyone hate her? Maybe I should hate her too, you know? But where you can see through others' actions, but then also kind of through the way the narration relates this, you can see that there's more going on here than just what Aaron understands. And
Right.
it really, like, it does make you more sympathetic towards her. It makes you more sympathetic towards her father. It makes you it brings sort of a more of a sense of doom, because you're not just like, oh, this one girl and she has this one problem, but it's like something's going on. There's like a shadow coming over the country, and the narrator is the one that clues you into that. So I just think it takes it to such a higher level. It just
Yeah. Okay.
it stand out, made it last to me than other books that I read at the time that were, you know, also fantasy, also like a girl in charge, okay, but like this one is on a higher level to me.
Cassie, would you like to see more books get back to that kind of style?
I don't necessarily know as it's the style itself that I appreciate it. I think that this story lends itself really well to this particular writing style. And I think that's because the focus of the story was not the dragons. And for a lot of stories that have this sort of empowered female character, it's all about her going out and slaying dragons. And the dragons are really very peripheral in this story. It's all about Aaron, and all of the conflict is internal, and Aaron coming to, you know, understand herself and how she fits into the society around her and how she relates to the people who are in the society. And because it's about her and the struggles that she goes through and the people that she interacts with, that sort of omniscient style works really well with building that out. Because if you're just in it for the sword and swords and dragons, you're going to be disappointed, because the narration really just kind of glosses over that. It's like she gets to her first dragon fight, and then she's like, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and it sucked, but hey, she's alive, and then you just move on. And it's more about how what she does and what she's learning is affecting her internally. And
Sure.
I don't think that the story that the author was trying to tell would have come across as strongly if we had stayed stuck inside of Erin's head just so deeply, and seeing all of the different nuances and how her muscles moved when she swung her sword, and the way that the light glistened off the scales of the dragon. You know, it's not that kind of story.
Awesome. Let's talk about what kind of story it is. This is an interesting. There are some interesting things in here that break up. And I'm going to ask each of you to just talk about whatever you want in just a second. But if you wanted to bring up any of these things, these are some of the things that stood out to me. One, it wants to subvert some norms, and it does so with dragons. It does, like Cassie mentioned, it does so with the typical hero archetype. It does so with that you get to see consequences, that like there are real serious consequences to a lot of the things that happen, and it deals with those and kind of dives into those. What are some things that stood out to each of you as far as how this book was kind of unique in its placement as far as where things are coming out. What was Robin McKinley trying to do as far as making her book stand out from others around the same time period? Let's start with Jessica this time.
Well, first of all, this continues to be the only Newbery Award-winning book with a sex scene in it. It's very implied. It
it's
went
an implied.
right over my head until about the fourth reading.
Yeah.
But she still gets hate mail from people.
Does she really?
Like,
oh wow.
oh yeah, yeah. She's been called the limb of Satan and stuff like that in mail, because for parents reading it with their kids suddenly realizing what's being implied in the one scene, and it just makes me laugh. But I came to this first. This was basically the first fantasy book I ever read. I always talk about this. This is like my whole gist of my school presentation is that I thought I did not like books because I was being offered things like the Babysitter's Club, first few Babysitter's Club books and stuff like that, or like the Hardy Boys Nancy Drew, and I was like, there is nothing here to interest me. So I found Hero in the Crown because I had to do a book report. Oh my gosh. And the cover that I saw first, you could tell she had red hair. So I was into that as a redhead. So, I read it, and then it set the bar so high. I feel like that I was just like everything I read after that was like, Erin would never, so because just the style of the writing, but also I really appreciated the fact, as someone who would love to be able to say, oh yes, I know how to use a sword, I can joust, and stuff, but also is like, oh, look at that gorgeous dress. I appreciated the fact that she came home from fighting dragons and got dressed up and went to dinner, and she wasn't good at it, but she danced with her cousins and stuff like that, like she was supposed to. And I appreciated the fact that she was not a boy with a bust, basically. Like, so many of the other like sort of girl power fantasies that started coming out at that time that I started finding, it was someone who wanted to be a knight or wanted to slay a dragon, and that was their entire personality, was that they hated anything feminine. And they were not feminine, and there, was not really a love interest at all or anything like that. And I loved the fact that Erin was a faceted character everyone is. She can be in love with not one but two guys, actually. She can find romance. She can wear a dress and admit that she does actually like wearing this nice dress and stuff like that. And she can still fight dragons. Also, I think it's the first time I've ever seen a hero, and it was the first one I saw for a long time, where there were consequences to these fights. Mm-hmm. She was injured, severely injured. In fact, she's severely injured over the course of the book because she is a girl with zero training who put on armor she made herself and went out to fight dragons. It's the fire and the claws, and so she is injured, and there are consequences to that go on, and there's consequences to her actions. And it was really, so when I read other books where someone's just like, I don't want to be a princess, I want to be a knight, and they find armor which fits and works, like there's a lot of trial and error with Erin figuring out how to make herself fireproof, and she experiments, it takes a long time, with the potion. She experiments with what she's gonna wear. She experiments with the saddle of her horse, because what she's supposed to do if she's got a spear in one hand, put the reins in her mouth, like while she uses a shield. She invents a new style of riding because in order to figure out how to do this, because she has no training. And just that, which I know from being told this, was so boring to some people who read this book. And only as kids, in fairness, like kids, not other writers, not like adults and stuff, but kids sometimes reading this book are like, she spends hours and hours just trying to figure out how to do stuff. It's like, yeah, to me, that was what made it so cool and realistic. Not everything works out for her immediately. There are
Right.
consequences. It's all of that just made this like so interesting to me, and just other books, just it was hard for me to find one that could compare.
Awesome. All right, Jeff, put on your writer hat. Put yourself in Robin McKinley's shoes for a second. How did the things that she was trying to do to make this book unique and make it stand out and all that stuff? How did that work for you?
Well, I had a different experience because like I read the book like 3 weeks ago for the first time.
Yeah.
So
Really?
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
it was
this is a good
Interesting.
thing
But
to point
you're
out that
you're
Jessica
fresh.
Jessica loves this book. It's your favorite, one of your
yeah,
favorite books. Cassie had read it a long time ago, and Jeff read it for
I
the
still
first
remember
time.
it.
Yeah.
And I'm struggling to
That is
remember it right now. No, I'm just kidding.
that
Um,
is a cool
but
perspective to have.
but that's what one of the things I liked about this book being chosen for this was to be able to look at, okay, how does this stand up today? And I was so delighted that it still stands up today, that I got sucked into the narrative. I liked the characters, even though, haven't read third person omniscient in a while. It worked for what it was trying to do. One of the things that I really loved about it that I don't think that hasn't been mentioned yet is just part of the narrative pacing, how it could go real fast. She could jump over weeks and weeks, and then all of a sudden then slow down to a moment, and make that moment like just a conversation, or a scene with her maid, or with her horse Talent, and all of a sudden it just kind of zooms in and then it zooms out again, and then we're running ahead and skipping over time. That it didn't bog down with all, trying to flesh out every little detail that happened. I really like that. The And so, like, it maybe the writing style might not appeal to everybody today, but it still worked for me. Just kind of like when I can still read Dickens, I can still read Jane Austen, I can still read classics, and it still jumps out, and I can see why this has stood the test of time. The one thing that didn't work for me, and it's this point was brought up, and I liked the consequences that happened, but all the time she spent figuring out how to ride a horse, yet she ran into battle against, the big dragon, especially with like, and the fight with the wizard. We won't talk about that later, but like she just charges in with like, it's felt like she spent zero time thinking about, I might die. And I'm glad that there were those consequences that came, because I had a little note on my Kindle, like she wasn't very introspective about these huge issues she was about to face. She's like, I think I can do it. And I'm glad that, maybe she was successful, but that there were these avalanche of consequences that came. That was helpful. But like personally, I'm like, I couldn't have gone into a situation like that without like thinking about, okay, like I could die and maybe I should have somebody come along, with the cell phone or something, call my next of kin, So
Leave
those were
a
some of the things
will
that
on
stood
my
out to me.
pillow.
That's a good point. Yeah, she does rush into the big things a lot. That's a she doesn't necessarily think before she acts sometimes. I think that's well established in the book, though. What do you think, Cassie? How did Robin McKinley make this stand out in your eyes? Like, what sets it apart? What did she do that helped it to set apart from other books and stuff, especially books that might have come just before it or were around that time?
I think again it was a lot of what's already been said. This idea of she's not just a a guy with a chest. She's a real girl. She feels like a real girl. She has real girl issues. And if you're not a girl, you wouldn't necessarily recognize what those real girl issues are. But being a girl, you know, even as a even as a child, I recognized the issues that she was going through as issues I was going through as a girl, as a young woman, and then even now, looking rereading it for the first time in 20 plus years and thinking, I get it. I feel this. And I think that's one of the things that really set it apart is that Robin McKinley worked really hard to make Erin feel like a real person and to, give her flaws, and not just have her have everything work out and then just keep working out. So, she had to work a lot of trial and error to make sure that her, magic potion worked to make her fireproof. And like's been said, she had to experiment with her clothing. She had to put herself at serious risk. And, I think that we see this proclivity that she has for not thinking things through the first time, that she's like, oh, I found this magic potion in a book. It's not really specific, but I'm going to try and make it. And then instead of using like a stick or something, her very first impulse is to put it on her
Just stick her
finger.
Finger.
And stick her finger in the candle. And then she's like, ow, that didn't work. Let me use this finger. Let me use this finger. She uses all of her fingers. And then she's like, maybe I should use a stick. And so she's so focused on finding a purpose to her life. And I think one of the things that's really sad but also really true is that when she sets a goal for herself and she's like, that will give me purpose. She sets this goal and she reaches that goal and she's like, I feel purposeless still. And then she's like, okay, well, this will give me figuring out how to make this potion, that will give me purpose. Okay, now I've made it. Slaying dragons, that will give me purpose. Joining the army, that will give me purpose. And she just keeps going. And one of the things that I really loved about the end of the book, and I know we're not spoiling, but she finds a higher purpose, something that elevates her so high that she's able to stand up and look down and say, all of those other things are really great, but this gives me purpose. And I really loved that. And I loved that it wasn't a big glory thing. It was a small, simple, everyday kind of thing. But it was resonant, because we lose sight, I think, of the things in life that really truly give us purpose. And having it brought to us in fiction is so, so rare. It's so rare, because especially in the fantasy and the science fiction genres that are all about, sensationalizing things, you slay the big bad dragon and you go home and you get the glory, and you end with this big party and everybody lives happily ever after. But do they? Do they really? Because there's always another dragon to slay. And that's one of the things that this book really did well, was that, yeah, she slayed her first dragons and it was kind of a struggle. She didn't think it through. It was a terrible experience. But then she falls into like this rut, I guess you could say, of just dragon slaying, and just it becomes just her everyday. Oh,
And dragon slaying becomes an everyday rut.
Right, exactly. She's just like, gotta go slay another dragon. And then but yeah, it just, and that, I think, to me, is what really holds up this constant pursuit of purpose, until she realizes that everything that she thought was up here is actually right here. And this is where it was all along. And I loved that. I really loved that. And there were things in it that were really clunky. Like, at one point, like, we have zero context to what the crown is. Like, we know who the hero is, right?
Yeah.
We're watching her become the hero, but we have zero context for what the crown is, until, like, all of a sudden, in some random scene in the middle of the night, she's like, hey, cousin, tell me about this crown that I should totally know about as the, princess of this nation. And he's like, oh yeah, I can tell you all about it. And I was like, oh, that threw me out of the book so hard. I was like, oh, wow, we're doing this hey doctor thing. Okay.
That's a good point. It does. There are some things that are a little bit clunky. Before we started, Cassie was talking about how the book is big on kind of telling over showing. Did Jessica or Jeff, did you guys find that to be the case as well? What did you think about that?
I think that's because of the style of it, though. Like, because it's being told to you. And I was just gonna say too, though. I'm sitting here playing with my original copy.
That's the original cover, yeah.
Like, that I pulled out, that is signed to me, by the way, to Jessica with Aaron colored hair, might I add.
Nice.
But it opens at the halfway mark, which is the aftermath of the battle with the big dragon, and it is exactly in the middle. which is so fascinating because this book is 227 pages long. In 227 pages, she managed to show this whole arc of this character, the growth, the discovery of fireproof lotion, retraining an old horse, fighting dragons, fighting a big dragon, all this stuff that happens. Can you imagine an author today managing to pull this off?
Never.
Oh my goodness.
That would be like a 15-book series.
Oh, it absolutely would. And like most of that would be padding and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
It would.
it's kind of funny because there are some kind of parts where you're like, oh, okay, she needed to find out about this. So like, thank heavens Tor knew this entire history of this, which does make sense. I mean, he's training to be the king. So yeah, he's educated. But the way it's done is a bit, it's a bit like, I've seen worse, but I've also seen better,
True. I have seen worse. That is true.
Yeah. The fact that she's able, like you were saying, Jeff, to like, there are these moments, these scenes and stuff, and yet then she'll whip through and go 6 months later, this is where my recovery is at and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is kind of impressive, but it's also, I can see where some of the time it could be for readers like, wait, what just like,
She starts at like what 12, 13, and then she ends up at like 19. But it just like screams through a lot of it.
It's interesting too, going with what you were just saying. Sorry, Jeff. But going with what you were saying is, they say with middle grade fiction, your main character is trying to figure out who they are. Like, they often it's a book of discovery. Like, I can still be a big sister, a good big sister, and like love science or something like that. And then teen books, more young adult books, teenagers are figuring out their place in the world. I think is really interesting how she manages to do that. And she moves her through from 12 and like, am I illegitimate? Am I, was my mother a witch? Like, who really am I? To basically spending the book searching and figuring out, okay, I know who I am. I know my dad loves me. I know my mother loved me. But where do I fit in? Like, her whole book, that quest for where do I fit in, is so perfectly like a tween to teen appropriate like story arc and appropriate journey. And that, I think, is why it's so satisfying and has continued to be so satisfying, because it's what we all wanted when we were fumbling around as teenagers too. Like, how do I fit into this family dynamic? Like, how do I fit in like my new blended family, all those things, and like, who am I in the world is what we're all looking for. And seeing her find it through trial and error over much time is really very satisfying.
Jeff, there's
Jessica. I just want to piggyback on something Jessica said, because when you open the book halfway to that halfway point, right? When I'm reading a novel, I'm kind of saying, what's being telegraphed? What's the plot? What am I trying to go after? And then all of a sudden we have the big dragon fight in the middle. I'm like, okay, the dragons isn't what this is all about. Yeah. Right? It subverted that expectation.
He's there on the cover breathing fire.
Yeah.
Like every cover.
That's supposed to be the end of the book. And so that was, to me, that was intriguing, right? That was, okay, what's going on? And then when I got to the end of the second half, I saw the seeds that were planted earlier on. The whole seeds about, who's my mom and all that stuff. Those things hadn't been answered yet by the dragon fighting scene. And so it kept going to reveal that stuff. And I liked how expectations kind of got subverted throughout, because you kind of think this is what's going to happen, and it's not. A whole new main character shows up in the second half of the book with those dreams, and it's like, where was this? How come I didn't notice these things earlier?
Jeff, I was going to ask you, there's something else I wanted to bring up or talk about, and that's the hero's journey in relationship to how this book handles it. It's kind of interesting. It's got some interesting breaks in it. Jessica and Jeff, you both talked about how her big fight is like the big fight of the book that normally you would think would be the end or the point of the book. It actually happens right in the middle, and there's still a lot to go. She hasn't even met her mentor figure yet. And she hasn't, what you think would be her abyss turns out to not actually be her abyss at all. And that's kind of an interesting thing too.
If you know the hero's journey, you start to get a little concerned for her. Like,
What did you think
she
about that?
defeated what, according to the cover, is the big bad, or but she's still a callow youth and has yet to find her wise mentor. Like, so
Yeah.
what is next on the menu? Because it's not that happy, all of this, and it skips over or goes a lot harder into things again with the consequences and stuff. She's been going out and, slaying lesser dragons, these little dragons that are basically the size of large dogs and are mostly vermin that maybe kind of singe a child or carry off someone's lamb or something like that. So that's still not her place, because that is something that is Dragon Slayer in their kingdom is not like a cool job. Dragon Slayer is something, get a party of hunters and get rid of this vermin and stuff. And the princess is doing it. And the common villagers who are feeling heard and cared for now by their royal family, they kind of love her for it. But no one else is impressed. No one in the palace is impressed that the princess it's like if I went out and was like trapping raccoons, like, did you hear that our neighbor now traps raccoons in her spare time? Like, what a weird thing. Like,
Well, and what you just said was really profound. I just want to interject. Sorry for interrupting, but like she's really good at it. She's the best dragon hunter in ages, but
And
that's
she can do
not.
it solo.
Yeah, and she can do it by herself.
That was
say,
the
she's
big
doing
thing, is
it
that she
solo,
could do it
not-
by
Yeah.
herself.
And so
Whereas all the other Dragon Slayers travel in like packs.
yeah, so that's what she's really good at that. She's successful, but that's not who she's supposed to be. And that's what Jessica was just saying, that she's supposed to be a princess and she's supposed to be a leader of the whole kingdom. And even though she's really good at this thing, she still hasn't found out what her real purpose is. So that's what Cassie was saying too earlier too. How did the second
really both your expectations of both like a fantasy novel, especially a teen fantasy novel, as well as the hero's journey? It's taking some things out of order. It's showing you one thing, like, and she became the best dragon slayer in the kingdom, and like that could end most young adult fantasy novels at this, right now. Like that would be like, whoa, cue the movie credits, like, and the movie deals and stuff like that. And that happens like a quarter of the way in the book, and no one is impressed.
Yeah.
But like some sheep farmers. Like, so it's like, wait, where is this going? It really is like keeping you on your toes, kind of like. And I love a book where you're like looking at the title the whole time, going like, what does this mean? What does this mean? The hero and the crown? Like, is she the hero? Is a dude gonna step up because it's the hero? From a time when it was very distinct, hero and the heroine, and stuff like that. So it's like, is she the hero? Is it going to turn out to be her cousin Tor or something like that?
Yeah.
What crown? Where is this crown? Like, I love things where it's like the clues are there. There are clues on the cover of the book. It just makes it all feel like so well put together. That like you're getting into something and you're not expecting what's going to happen.
Okay, here's a technical question, but this one, Jeff, I need to start with you because you're the one who has read this coming out of it from nowhere most recently. This as a prequel, this has a lot of world building elements in it that are explaining things that are in the Blue Sword book that came before this. So Robin McKinley wrote the Blue Sword and has a great like world building world that is very built out world. It has a lot of history to it and a lot of elements in it and characters and creatures and things like that. That in this book, she has to set up a reason for those things to be there. Did anything that she was doing in this book stand out to you as like clunky or made you wonder like, oh, that seems kind of shoehorned in or doesn't really I believe you haven't read the Blue Sword either, I assume. Okay. So having not read the Blue Sword,
to read the Blue Sword now.
having not read the Blue Sword, so Jeff and Cassie, you guys haven't read the Blue Sword. So Jeff, is there anything that you felt like, oh, that's kind of weird. That feels like she's doing something here that's kind of awkward or strange.
Not so much. Like, my Jettison novel in junior high was Terry Brooks,
Okay.
and I started off with the second book because I didn't even know about the first book, and so I guess I
Oh,
can jump into
Elfstones?
something.
Was it
I started with
Elfstones?
Elfstones. That was my
Yeah.
favorite book in high
It's the
school,
best
and
one.
I didn't read the first one until later, and so then I realized, oh, there was that setup going on. But she did such a good job. Robin did such a good job I was kind of like, well, she explains where she needs to explain. I love the description of dragons, I like highlighted it because it was like dragons had little ones, dog sized, nasty, mean tempered creatures that could fry a baby for supper and swallow it in gulps if they could, but it had to be beaten back into the forest. And so just that, like those two sentences just gave me like everything I needed to know about the lore that this like okay, there's going to be a big dragon later because I can see I can see the cover art and stuff. But to me, the world building that's explained as you go and as you need it, that's the kind that I like. And it didn't feel, other than sometimes the occasional, history of her own family that was kind of dumped. There's a little bit of that, but most of it, the pacing was good enough that it was answered when I needed to hear it, and it kept me engaged. And I didn't need to feel like I had to go run and grab another book to understand this one.
Awesome. What do you think, Cassie? Anything that was like, wow, that really sticks out, or something that doesn't seem to fit?
No, not really. I think the only other thing that when you initially said that that came to my mind was hearing that the sequel prequel is called The Blue Sword. Um, like she made like a really big deal about the fact that the magic sword that she gets later, and of course it's a fantasy. She's a hero. Of course she's gonna get a magic sword, but like it's a magic sword and it glows blue and it does stuff. And then we're moving on. And I was like, what? Is that all we're okay?
That's it.
We're just moving on because the blue sword wasn't important to this story, but it's
Yeah.
clearly important to the other one. So it's like, oh, by the way, there was a blue sword and it belongs to this girl. You're welcome. And and I was like, oh, so that was a little bit like out of I guess a little out of context it felt like to me. Like if because the sword wasn't really all that big of a deal. I mean, it helped her in her quest, but not so much that we have to like stop and talk about the sword. It literally could have been Excalibur for all that it mattered, but clearly that's important to the sequel. So there was that part. Um but she's a phenomenal world builder, and I love that, like Jeff said, she's able to give these small little, 1-2 sentence descriptors, and it just opens up this whole image in your mind. Like that to me is aspirational writing. I would love to be able to write 2 sentences and have people extrapolate an entire world from that,
Yeah.
because it just every time she did it, and I had to listen to it because I drive a ton for my job, and so I was listening to it, and I remember reading it back when I was like 10 or 11. And so, but listening to it is like a whole different element, right? You use a whole different part of your brain when you listen than when you read. And so it was giving me very vivid pictures as I'm listening to this story be told to me. And the style lends itself really well to an oral telling. It's like it's got that, we talked about this earlier, but it's kind of got that feel of come gather around the fire, I'm going to tell you a story type
Yeah,
of
for sure.
vibe to it. And hearing it out loud just kind of elevates that even more. And so I loved the way that it flowed, the way that the world just like grew organically, and the only places that felt off to me were those places where it kind of felt like she was like, oh yeah, I have to tell you guys about this info dump, and we're moving on now.
All right. As authors, then, as this is our final question for everybody, as an author, what things do you try to do in your books? Tell us about some of your books and things that would be similar to what Robin McKinley is trying to say in this book. or even the world building or the tone or something that you do. Tell us about your favorite book that is most similar to The Hero and the Crown. We're going to start with Jessica is our biggest fan of Robin McKinley in this panel, so we're going to start with Jessica, and then we'll go to Cassie and then Jeff.
Well, I literally in 5th grade read this book, decided I like books, and also that I wanted to be Robin McKinley when I grew up. So this Hero and the Crown literally is the book that made me say, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And I got up there and, had a bad professor and was basically told that writing for younger readers and writing fantasy was just throwing whatever talent I had away writing trash.
You got those too?
So I had this man who flames surrounding my face. Anyway, basically told me, you have a little bit of talent, don't throw it away writing trash for children, to my face in front of the rest of the class after he read one of my short stories.
Oh, wow.
And so I sort of put aside that dream and was miserable for several years trying to write serious adult books like noir or something like that, just to be a published author. So miserable. And when I came up with an idea, just sort of like a bolt from the blue, flash of lightning, came up with the idea of this girl meeting a dragon that sort of subverted all the like maiden being sacrificed to the dragon to save the village type of stories. That is my first published book, Dragon Slippers. It continues to be extremely successful and changed my life, and then also changed how I write, because I suddenly, my husband even said to me, as I was getting rejected time and again for these serious books, he's like, you always told me you wanted to be the next Robin McKinley, but what are you writing? What is this kind of thing? And I'm like, that's it for you. You don't get to read anything else I write ever again.
Oh.
Nagged at me for years that what I had wanted was to write something like Hero and the Crown, and until I found that idea, and basically the premise of Dragon Slippers is, and I always think of it, she's not being sacrificed to a dragon, but in Clash of the Titans, Andromeda chained to the rock, father, no, mother, no, and she's being sacrificed to the monster to save the village. So Dragon Slippers starts out with this girl who, her aunt and uncle just inherited her and her siblings, and they're like, this is too many kids now. So they are going to take her up and leave her outside a dragon's cave, and either the local knight will come and save her, and then they'll all get to go live in his manor house, right, as her loving family, or she'll get eaten and we'll be better off. And when she gets there, the knight isn't interested in fighting for her. He's never fought a dragon before. He doesn't think girls with freckles are that hot. So, she's having her worst day ever. The dragon comes out and is like, I'm too old to deal with this. What am I even supposed to do with you? And she's like, let me go. And he's like, yeah, I don't think that's how it works. So, I just sort of set out what if you subverted all these things? You go out to be sacrificed to a dragon. The dragon doesn't want to deal with it. The knight doesn't want to fight with you. So she's like, I'm going to sneak into his hoard and get some gold to make my fortune with. And this dragon collects shoes. He is a fashionista. He enjoys seeing how human fashions change over the years. So all the dragons she meets, they all hoard different things, just like we as humans collect things. For instance, I collect dragons. So I just sort of, every time I was sort of stuck, I'd be like, well, what is the thing you expect me to do? I'm not going to do that. But also at the same time, what is something satisfying to me as a reader that I could do with this book? And I really did get that from just hardlining all of Robin McKinley's works after I started Hero the Crown. It's just sort of like Beauty, her first book, Beauty, is a Beauty and the Beast story, which was clearly so much of it was Disney took so much of it for the cartoon. She's not pretty, and the Beauty is her nickname from when she was a child that she now resents because she doesn't feel like, she feels like it's an insult. She's bookish and she's not into dancing and wearing pretty dresses and stuff like that, and I felt like she was just subverting every part of that basic fairy tale. So just that's what I always try to do, is just sort of look at it like, what would be something different that could happen here, but still be satisfying as a reader.
Awesome. What do you think,
That
Cassie? Something.
that sounds fantastically awesome, and it reminded me very much of Blue Moon Rising, where it starts out kind of like that way, where the prince goes to the cave to slay the dragon, and the dragon's like, really, I mean, I guess we could do this. And then the princess is like trying to get the dragon to kidnap her because she needs to be kidnapped. And the dragon's just like, I can't deal with this. That's great. I love those kinds of books. Um, so, one of the things that I really liked about um, Robin McKinley's, The Hero and the Crown, and the way that it relates to my writing is that you can see the questions that she may have posed to herself in order to get the answers as we're moving through this book. So, what is the question that sparked this book? I don't know, but for me it would probably be something along the lines of, what if dragons were vermin? Like, you get this question comes to your mind, what if dragons are vermin? And then the world kind of builds itself around that idea. And I think the closest of the books that I have written that comes to this genre, this style, this the feel that this book gives is Guardian Angel. It's that one. And it's very different stylistically, because obviously I'm writing it in the 2020s and not in 1984. But it's first person, but it starts with this question of, what would it really look like if a teenage girl decided to become a vigilante? And she has this training from her stepfather, but she's a little girl. She's like 5 foot nothing, and like all of like 98 pounds. And she's supposed to be taking on some of the worst criminals in her city. And she's very good at what she does. She's been raised doing it. She's got all the traditional, you know um vigilante heroine type of things, the parkour and the mixed martial arts and the all that sort of stuff. But her arch nemesis steps into the scene for like 2 seconds and takes her apart. Just just takes her apart. And that's not spoilers, that's like chapter 2. um and
So
so
again, moving what should be the
Yeah.
big bad forward into the
Yes.
narrative, so
And
there's more to come.
And so the entire story is not how does she beat this guy, it's how does she get to a place where she can think about how to defeat this guy. And they do, they do have their final confrontation and everything like that, but it's not what you're expecting. He is like the biggest drama queen you've ever seen, and he just like sets this stage, and he's like got cameras and everybody's watching, and she's just like, what is happening? Because what would that really look like? She would never be able to beat him one on one. And so what would that look like? And you feel the whole time like she's being pulled along by a string, because she tells you the whole time she's being pulled along by a string, and she doesn't know where this ends, and she doesn't know how she's going to overcome it and how she's going to get there. And all of these different things that you expect to happen don't happen, because in real life they would never happen. And
Right.
yet my hope is that they work in the book, because that's the story that I'm telling. So, but it was a
Awesome.
lot of fun to write. I wrote that when I was like 20, and then when I was in my undergrad, I was very blessed to be able to be in a class with Orson Scott Card, and he read the first 10 it wasn't even the first 10 pages. He read like the first 3 chapters of that first book, and he's like, "This is terrible." And I was like, "Oh, okay," because he asked me he asked me beforehand. He's like, "Do you want honest feedback, or do you want me to pat you on the head?" And I was like, "I want honest feedback." He was honest. But just so I put it away and I rewrote it in, oh gosh, I don't know, 20 so I wrote it when I was 20. I rewrote it when I was 30, so 2017ish. and it's a much, much, much better for that story, for that feedback. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, Jeff. How is this similar to things that you like to write too?
I just have to say, Cassie, I had that experience with Terry Brooks where he read one of my chapters for a writing seminar, and then it was like he was taking like every single author he was just ripping to pieces, and I was like, I'm about to get flayed by the man I admire the most.
And there's that sense of horror, but there's also that
Kindly,
sense of
because
Orson
it's
Scott
Terry
Card
Brooks.
just ripped my book apart.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you. So, the book I thought of that I've written that I saw some parallels, and since I hadn't read The Hero and the Crown, I can't claim any inspiration
Right.
for it. But it's my King Fountain series, and the first three books are kind of telling the story of one character, and then the next three books um, are about kind of like the next generation. And so I was inspired by this teenage girl who I was her seminary teacher, and she had gotten Bell's palsy as a young, where half of her face was
Oh
paralyzed,
my goodness.
and so she couldn't smile like with with part of her face she'd smile with just the other part, and if you knew about it, then you could notice it, but you just saw that something was a little bit different about her, and just how she faced this challenge, especially in high school where they ridicule you for anything. Her courage, and so I made her the main character in that second King Fountain series, which is kind of a retelling of Arthurian tales, but just in a different way. And I made her the Lancelot character in a way where she, her dad was the hero of the realm. Her mom was the greatest sorcerer and the magic user in the realm, and everyone was expecting her to become, to train under mom, but she wanted to train under dad, and he's like, nope, nope. So she ends up going to the training yard with the captain of the guard, Captain Staley, and Trin just learns how to fight, learns how to wear armor, learns how to do these things. And then when an opening comes up in the round table, she decides to compete for it. But she has to disguise herself so that people don't know who she is, because her dad's famous, her mom's famous. And the first book's called The Hollow Crown, and that kind of had some of those vibes to me, because she would love to wear dresses and love to go to events and stuff, but she also could put on armor and go through a literal gauntlet of things trying to smash her and destroy her and win, and just trying to live up to the reputation of both super type A parents. And I just that kind of reminded me a little bit of The Hero and the Crown, and I think that story, the 3 book story where she ends up having to save her dad, like he gets taken off the board and no one knows where he is, and she's the one who gets to go find him. And a lot of my readers just love her story arc and what she comes in. I think it's kind of the closest thing I've written that is similar to Robin McKinley.
Awesome.
Living up to your famous parents, or like trying to be your own person with like in a royal family, I think is such an interesting premise that I think speaks to so many people. Because I mean, even my dad was an agronomist and he worked for the forestry service and stuff like that, but like even so, like I felt that so much that he had done was so great, and people knew me as his daughter. It's like, what could I do to still be myself and make him proud of me, like I think that resonates for anyone. That's really interesting.
This is kind of off topic, but I think one of the things that made Ron everybody's favorite character in Harry Potter before the movies came out and ruined him was that idea that everything that he could do in his life, his brothers had already done.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And having to find his own place in the world and live up to that. And
Yep.
somebody who comes from a big family, and there's I've got 6 brothers and 2 sisters, and my youngest brother is young enough he could be my kid. And he just turned 21, and I could see that, as he's growing up and he's realizing all of these things that he could do that his brothers have already done, or, his sisters have already done, and trying to find your own place in the world. I love those kinds of stories. And to bring it back around to this book, so that it doesn't sound like I'm going completely off the rails, is that that's Erin's story. You know, she doesn't have that big family, but she does still have those feelings, and I think it's a very human feeling that,
Mhm.
and it draws people together, and it's not because it's a shared misery, it's because it's a shared triumph. You know,
Yeah.
you initially connect because you recognize those shared miseries, but as you watch somebody rise above misery to find a better mindset, because that's really what Erin needed to change, right? She didn't need to learn how to fight dragons. She didn't need to learn magic. She didn't need to, figure out how to go to the moon. She needed to figure out how to love herself. And that is something that everybody has gone through at some point in their life.
Such a universal theme. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I think I'm going to put words in your mouth, but I think we've got 8 thumbs up for The Hero in the Crown. And we'll recommend
And
it for
also the
sure.
Blue Sword. You've got to read the Blue Sword now.
I didn't
Absolutely.
even know there was another book, actually, but yeah, I want to read it.
Yeah.
It's because The Hero in the Crown is basically their history. Like, it's not a prequel like years ago when your dad did this. It is like hundreds of years ago. So some of the stuff in the Blue Sword doesn't quite match up
But
because
that makes
this
sense.
is what
Yeah.
actually happened, and the Blue Sword is like what we now tell our kids happened because it is 500 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
They are Aaron is their legend.
I love that.
And
Yep.
the society and the culture and everything is very different because of like what happens in The Hero in the Crown. It's very interesting. I really like
Yeah.
how it lined up.
Maybe for the last one this year, we'll do the Blue Sword and we'll compare and contrast. That might be fun. All right.
I'm one of maybe 20 people that has read her unpublished third book. She read the first 50 pages out loud at an event at BYU. There were like 20 of us in this room or something years ago, and then there's been a whole thing. She talks about it on her website. It will probably never be published.
Wow.
And it takes place immediately after the Blue Sword, and it is really fascinating because it's a completely new perspective on all of that as well. It's like, here were these other people, this is what was happening in the background. So
cool. Well,
always
thanks.
wonder what peasants were doing while the royalties out.
What
changing the world.
what are the peasants doing? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for your insights today. I knew I had a good group, and I'm glad that you could be here. And I'm excited to see. Do we get to see all of you next month at LTUE? Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Then I'll look for you, and I'm excited to say hi. Okay. Well, appreciate everybody tuning in, and this will be up on our YouTube channel. If you're watching this and it's not January 24th, then you're watching it in the future, and we're glad that you're doing it. So thanks again, and tune in again every month. We'll post the dates. They're not all going to be the same day of the month because of scheduling stuff, but we're excited to keep doing this, and we hope to introduce you to some great books this year. Thanks again, and thanks Jessica, thanks Cassie, and thanks Jeff.
Thanks.
Bye.
Glad to be here.